What if I told you that Plymouth's biggest success story of the 1970s was a car they never wanted to build, a car that corporate executives fought against, that dealers initially refused to order, and that was supposed to be dead on arrival? This is the story of how a last-minute panic project, cobbled together with borrowed parts and a shoestring budget, accidentally saved an entire division and outsold every muscle car Plymouth ever built. Picture this. It's late 1969, and Plymouth executives are sitting in their Detroit offices, staring at sales reports that make their blood run cold. The Barracuda, their pride and joy, the car they'd bet the farm on, is getting absolutely demolished in the marketplace. Not by the Mustang, not by the Camaro, but by their own corporate sibling, the Dodge Challenger. Plymouth had spent millions developing the new E-body Barracuda for 1970, convinced it would dominate the pony car market. They got the platform, the looks, the engines, everything perfect. Then Dodge took the exact same platform, made it 2 inches longer, gave it a different grille, and proceeded to outsell the Barracuda 2-1. The Plymouth Duster wasn't supposed to exist. It was never in the product plan. No focus groups asked for it. No executives championed it. It was born out of pure desperation when Plymouth realized they were about to lose an entire generation of buyers. What happened next would become one of the most unlikely success stories in automotive history, a tale of accidental genius, corporate rebellion, and how sometimes the best products come from having no time, no money, and no other options. To understand how Plymouth ended up in this mess, we need to travel back to 1964. That's when Ford unleashed the Mustang and created an entirely new market segment. Plymouth's response? The Barracuda, which actually beat the Mustang to market by 2 weeks. But while Ford sold 400,000 Mustangs in the first year, Plymouth barely moved 23,000 Barracudas. The problem was simple. The Barracuda was built on Plymouth's compact Valiant platform, and it looked like it. The Mustang looked like a sports car. The Barracuda looked like a Valiant, with a big back window. By 1967, the pony car wars were in full swing. Chevrolet had entered with the Camaro, Pontiac brought the Firebird, Mercury had the Cougar, and AMC even threw in the Javelin. Plymouth knew they needed something completely new. They needed to shed the economy car image. They needed something that would make people forget the Barracuda was ever related to the Valiant. Enter the E-body platform. This was Chrysler's Moonshot, an all-new platform designed specifically for pony cars. Plymouth would get the Barracuda, Dodge would get the Challenger. The development costs were astronomical. We're talking about $75 million in 1968 money. That's over $600 million in today's dollars. The E-body cars would have everything: independent front suspension, leaf springs out back, that could handle massive torque, engine bays wide enough to swallow the 426 Hemi or the Ford 40 six-pack. The styling was penned by John Hurlitz, and it was gorgeous. Long hood, short deck, aggressive stance. This was going to be Plymouth's comeback. The 1970 Barracuda launched to rave reviews from the automotive press. Motor Trend called it the most handsome car Plymouth has ever built. Car and Driver said it had the best handling of any pony car. The engine lineup was incredible. You had everything from the economical 225/6 all the way up to the mythology-creating 426 Hemi Cuda. The 340 Cuda could run the quarter mile in the high 13s. The 446 pack would chirp the tires shifting into third. The Hemi? It was putting down quarter-mile times in the low 13s right off the showroom floor. But here's where things went horribly wrong. While Plymouth was celebrating their engineering triumph, buyers were walking right past the Barracuda and into Dodge dealerships to buy Challengers. The sales numbers were devastating. In 1970, Plymouth sold 48,867 Barracudas. Dodge? They moved 76,935 Challengers. Same platform, same engines, same basic car. But Dodge was crushing Plymouth. The reasons were subtle but crucial. The Challenger was 2 inches longer in wheelbase, 110 inches versus 108. Doesn't sound like much, but it gave the Challenger a slightly better ride and more rear seat room. The Challenger also had a different roofline that looked more formal, more expensive. Dodge marketed the Challenger as a sports car for adults. Plymouth marketed the Barracuda as a youth-oriented muscle machine. Guess which approach resonated with buyers who actually had money? But the real problem wasn't the Challenger. The real problem was that the entire pony car market was collapsing. Insurance companies had declared war on muscle cars. A 20-year-old male trying to insure a Hemi Cuda might as well have been trying to insure a Saturn V rocket. The rates were astronomical, sometimes more than the car payment itself. The Clean Air Act of 1970 was looming, threatening to strangle high-performance engines. Gas prices were starting to creep up. The Vietnam War was making young people think about things other than cars, and there was a recession brewing that would hit in 1970. Plymouth executives watched in horror as their $600 million investment turned into a sales disaster. They needed something, anything, to generate volume and keep the dealers happy. But they had no money for another new platform. The E-Body had drained the development budget. They had maybe $15 million to work with, pocket change in automotive development terms. That's when someone, and history has never definitively recorded who, had an idea that was either brilliant or insane. What if they took the mundane Valiant platform, the very platform they just spent $600 million to get away from, and turned it into a sporty coupe, not a pony car? Those were dying. Not a muscle car. Insurance killed those. But something in between, something that looked fast but was cheap to insure, something that had style but didn't break the bank. The Valiant platform was ancient by automotive standards. It dated back to 1960, making it a decade old by 1970. But it had some advantages. First, it was completely amortized. All the development costs had been paid off years ago. Second, it was simple and reliable. The suspension was basic but effective. Torsion bars up front, leaf springs out back. The unit body construction was strong and relatively light. Third, and most importantly, Chrysler had been refining it for 10 years. They knew every strength, every weakness, every dollar that could be squeezed out of production. The project was green-lit in desperation in late 1968, giving the team less than 18 months to create an entirely new model. The budget was laughable, $15 million. To put that in perspective, GM spent more than that just designing the Camaro's dashboard. The development team, led by product planner Bob McCurry and chief stylist Bill Brownlee, had to work miracles. The first stroke of genius was the decision to keep the Valiant's 108-inch wheelbase and basic hard points, but create an entirely new body from the cowl back. This meant they could use the Valiant's front-end structure, firewall, and front suspension without any modifications. That saved millions right there. The windshield, front doors, and most of the interior could be carried over from the two-door Valiant. More millions saved. But from the B-pillar back, it would be all new. Brownlee's team created a semi-fastback roofline that was racier than the formal Valiant, but not as extreme as the Barracuda. The rear quarter windows were eliminated, creating a more muscular, coupe-like profile. The trunk was integrated into the roofline in a way that looked sporty, but still provided decent cargo space. The rear end got horizontal taillights that spanned the width of the car, giving it a wider, more planted appearance. The genius was in the proportions. While the Duster shared the Valiant's front end, the new roofline and rear body created an optical illusion. The car looked longer, lower, and wider than it actually was. The belt line, the line running along the bottom of the windows, was raised slightly, making the glass area smaller and the body appear more substantial. The result was a car that looked like it could be a muscle car, but was actually based on an economy platform. The name Duster came from Plymouth's desire to capitalize on the success of their Roadrunner, another car with a whimsical name that had become a huge seller. They wanted something that suggested performance, but in a playful, non-threatening way. Duster fit perfectly. It implied speed, leaving others in your dust, but didn't scream racing to insurance companies. Now here's where it gets interesting. While the body was being developed, the powertrain team was working on engine options. The base engine would be the 198 cubic inch slant 6, making 125 horsepower. Adequate, but uninspiring. The optional 225 slant 6 bumped that to 145 horsepower. Better, but still not exactly thrilling. But then someone had an idea that would change everything. Chrysler's 340 cubic inch V8 was a legend in the making. Introduced in 1968, it was a high-winding, high-performance small block that could embarrass big blocks on the street. It had a forged steel crank, forged pistons, a high-performance cam, and those beautiful high-flow heads with 2.02-inch intake valves. It was rated at 275 horsepower, but everyone knew that was conservative. Real-world dynos showed it making closer to 320. The 340 was already available in the Dart GTS and Swinger 340, but those were marketed as muscle cars with muscle car insurance rates. The stroke of genius was deciding to put the 340 in the Duster, but not call it a muscle car. Instead, they'd call it the Duster 340 and market it as a performance coupe. The insurance companies, looking at the Valiant platform VIN and the compact car classification, would rate it much lower than a Cuda or Roadrunner. The Duster 340 package was brilliantly executed. For just $2,547, about $500 less than a base 318 Barracuda, you got the 340 engine, a Torque-Flight automatic or 4-speed manual, heavy-duty suspension with front sway bar, E70 14 raised white letter tires, dual exhaust with chrome tips, and those iconic Duster 340 stripes and decals. The hood got dual scoops that were actually functional, feeding cold air to the engine. The interior got high-back bucket seats and a 3-spoke sport steering wheel. But here's the kicker. The Duster 340 weighed just 3,110 pounds. That's 400 pounds lighter than a 340 Barracuda. With the same engine making the same power, the power-to-weight ratio was significantly better. The Duster 340 could run 0-60 in 6.0 seconds and the quarter mile in 14.3 at 99 mph. Those numbers would embarrass many big block cars that cost twice as much and were impossible to insure. The Duster debuted in September 1969 as a 1970 model, and Plymouth executives held their breath. They'd rushed it to market, spent almost nothing on advertising, and were launching it into a market that seemed to be rejecting performance cars. They'd be happy if they sold 30,000 units. They'd be thrilled with 40,000. They sold 192,375 Dusters in the first model year. Let that sink in for a moment. The Duster, a car that was never supposed to exist, built on an ancient platform with borrowed parts and no development budget, outsold the Barracuda 4-1. It outsold the Challenger 2.5-1. It outsold the Mercury Cougar, the AMC Javelin, and the Pontiac Firebird. In fact, it outsold every single pony car except the Mustang and Camaro. The reasons for the Duster's explosive success were multifaceted, but they all came down to accidentally perfect timing and positioning. First, the price was right. A base Duster with the 6-cylinder started at just $2,172. That was $500 less than a base Barracuda and about the same as a Maverick or Nova. But the Duster looked infinitely cooler than those economy boxes. Second, the insurance situation was a massive advantage. A 20-year-old male could actually afford to insure a Duster 340. The insurance companies saw Valiant platform and compact car and rated it accordingly. They didn't care that it could blow the doors off most cars on the road. This wasn't just a small advantage. For many buyers, It was the difference between being able to own a performance car or not. Third, the timing was perfect for a different reason. As the traditional muscle car market was collapsing, there was a huge population of buyers who still wanted something sporty but needed it to be practical and affordable. The Duster hit that sweet spot perfectly. It had style, it had performance options, but it also got decent gas mileage with the six-cylinder and had a usable back seat and trunk. The Duster 340, in particular, became a street racing legend. It was the ultimate sleeper, a car that looked like it might be fast, but was actually faster than anyone expected. The 340 engine was a masterpiece of engineering. The bore was 4.04 inches, with a stroke of 3.31 inches, giving it an over-square design that loved to rev. The compression ratio was 10.5.1, high enough for serious power, but still able to run on premium pump gas. The valve train was where the 340 really shined. Those 2.02-inch intake valves were huge for a small block, the same size as the 440s. The exhaust valves were 1.60 inches. The camshaft was a hydraulic unit with 268 degrees of advertised duration and 429.444 inches of lift. It gave the 340 that distinctive choppy idle that announced this wasn't your grandmother's Valiant. The carburetor was a Carter AVS 4-barrel on 1970 models, replaced by a Carter Thermoquad in 1971. Both were rated at 625 CFM, plenty of airflow for the 340. The exhaust manifolds were specific high-flow units that fed into a true dual exhaust system with minimal restriction. The sound was intoxicating, a high-pitched metallic bark that was completely different from the rumble of a big block. But raw specifications only tell part of the story. The 340's real advantage was its combination of power and tractability. It made good torque from 2,000 RPM all the way to 6,000. You could lug it around town in high gear, then drop 2 gears, and suddenly you were pressing your head into the seat back. It was docile enough for your mom to drive to the grocery store, but vicious enough to humble a 383 Roadrunner at a stoplight. The suspension setup on the Duster 340 was surprisingly sophisticated for such a budget-oriented car. The front torsion bars were increased to 87 inches in diameter versus the standard 83 inches. The rear leaf springs got an extra leaf. The front sway bar was increased to 875 inches. The shock absorbers were heavy-duty units calibrated specifically for the 340's performance envelope. The result was a car that handled far better than its economy car roots would suggest. No, it wasn't a Porsche, but it was competent and predictable. The manual steering was heavy at low speeds but provided excellent feedback. The manual drum brakes were adequate, if not impressive. Front discs were optional and highly recommended. With the rally wheels and E70 14 tires, the Duster 340 could pull .75 gri on the skid pad, respectable for the era. The transmission choices were both excellent. The Torque-A-Flight A727 automatic was perhaps the best automatic transmission ever built. Strong, smooth, and nearly indestructible. It had a 2.45.1 first-gear ratio that provided strong acceleration off the line. The A833 4-speed manual was equally robust, with synchronized gears and gear ratios well matched to the 340's power band. Most Duster 340s came with 3.23.1 rear gears, though 3.55.1 and 3.91.1 ratios were available for the seriously speed-addicted. As 1970 turned into 1971, the Duster's success only accelerated. But storm clouds were gathering. The insurance crisis was getting worse. The government was cracking down on emissions, and Chrysler was facing a corporate crisis that would threaten everything. The 1971 model year brought the first real challenge to the Duster's performance credentials. Compression ratios had to be dropped to cope with the increasing scarcity of high-octane fuel and upcoming emissions regulations. The 340's compression dropped from 10.51 to 10.31, but Chrysler engineers performed a miracle. Through careful tuning of the cam timing and carburetor calibration, they actually managed to maintain the 275 horsepower rating despite the lower compression. However, there was corporate subterfuge at work. For 1971, the Duster 340 actually got the 340 six-pack engine's camshaft, though Chrysler never advertised this. This was the more aggressive 276-degree duration cam with .450 464 inches of lift. It gave the 1971 340s an even more radical idle and potentially more top-end power, though the lower compression ratio kept the peak numbers in check. Then came 1972, and everything changed. The industry switched from gross horsepower ratings to net ratings, which measured power with all accessories attached and through the production exhaust system. Overnight, the 340 went from 275 gross horsepower to 240 net. It looked like a massive power loss on paper, but in reality, the engine was making nearly the same power as before. The compression ratio dropped again to 8.5.1 to meet emission standards and run on regular unleaded gas, which was becoming the norm. This is where the Duster's positioning proved genius once again. While true muscle cars were being strangled by emissions equipment and struggling to maintain their image with drastically reduced power ratings, the Duster just kept selling. Buyers didn't care that much about the ultimate horsepower number. They cared that it looked good, was fun to drive, and didn't bankrupt them at the gas pump or insurance office. Plymouth sold 186,478 Dusters in 1971. In 1972, even as the muscle car market completely collapsed, they still moved 119,539 units. To put this in perspective, Plymouth sold more Dusters in 1972 alone than they sold Barracudas in the entire 7-year run of the E-body generation. The Duster was also becoming a force in professional drag racing. The National Hot Rod Association, NHRA, created the Pro Stock class in 1970, and Dusters were immediately competitive. The lightweight platform and excellent weight distribution made them ideal for drag racing. Sox and Martin, the legendary Chrysler racing team, campaigned Dusters to multiple championships. Ronnie Sox's driving and Buddy Martin's engine building created a combination that dominated Pro Stock in the early 1970s. Their Dusters weren't exactly stock, of course. The engines were distroked 340s that actually displaced 305 cubic inches to fit under the NHRA's cubic inch limit. They made over 500 horsepower and could turn 9-second quarter miles at over 140 miles. But they looked like Dusters, and that sold cars. Plymouth's win on Sunday, sell on Monday philosophy was working perfectly, but the Duster's influence went far beyond sales numbers and racing victories. It fundamentally changed how Detroit thought about performance cars. Before the Duster, the formula was simple. Bigger engine equals more performance equals more money. The Duster proved you could have genuine performance in an affordable, practical package. It pioneered the concept of the sport compact decades before that term was invented. Consider the engineering philosophy. The traditional muscle car approach was to stuff the biggest engine possible into a mid-size platform and damn the consequences. Weight distribution? Who cares? Handling? That's for Europeans. Fuel economy? That's for communists. The Duster took a different approach. Keep the weight down. Use a sophisticated small displacement engine. Make it handle reasonably well. The result was a car that was actually more fun to drive on a real road than many big block bruisers. This philosophy would influence everything from the Ford Mustang the Sioux to the Chevrolet Monza to eventually the entire sport compact movement of the 1990s and 2000s. The Honda Civic Si, the Volkswagen GTI, the Subaru WRX, they all follow the template the Duster accidentally created. Take a practical platform, add some performance hardware, keep it affordable and insurable, and let young enthusiasts have their fun. The Duster also saved Plymouth's dealer network. By 1971, Plymouth dealers were in full revolt. The Barracuda was a sales disaster. The Fury full-size cars were being outsold by Ford and Chevy 3-1. The Roadrunner, once a sales sensation, was dying. The only thing keeping dealers alive was the Duster. Some dealers reported that Dusters represented 60% or more of their sales volume. This created an interesting dynamic within Chrysler Corporation. Plymouth was supposed to be the budget brand, with Dodge positioned slightly upmarket. But the Duster's success meant Plymouth was actually outselling Dodge in many markets. Dodge executives were furious. They demanded their own version of the Duster. In 1971, Dodge got their wish with the Demon, essentially a Duster with Dodge badges and a different grille. But the name was a disaster. Religious groups protested, claiming Dodge was promoting devil worship. Seriously. The Demon lasted just 2 years before being renamed the Dart Sport in 1973. It never came close to matching the Duster's sales success, proving that sometimes the original has a magic that can't be replicated. The Duster evolved through its production run, but Plymouth was smart enough not to mess with the basic formula. For 1973, the 340 was replaced by the 360, a larger displacement engine that made the same 240 net horsepower, but with more torque lower in the RPM range. It was better suited to the emissions-controlled reality of the 1970s, though enthusiasts mourned the loss of the high-winding 340. 1974 brought the biggest visual change with a new front end featuring a more prominent grille and larger, stronger bumpers to meet federal crash standards. The car gained weight, about 200 pounds, and lost some of its athletic appearance, but it still sold. Plymouth moved 409 Dusters in 1974, the highest production year ever. Think about that. In the middle of the oil crisis, with gas lines and rationing, Plymouth sold more Dusters than ever before. Why? Because the Duster had evolved perfectly with market conditions. While you could still get the 360 V8, most buyers were choosing the Slant 6 for its excellent fuel economy. The Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, rated the 225 Slant 6 Duster at 18 city 24 highway. Excellent for the era. The car had become exactly what the market wanted: stylish, affordable, practical transportation with just enough performance potential to keep things interesting. The Duster's success created ripples throughout Chrysler's engineering departments. The profits from Duster sales, and they were substantial given the minimal development costs, funded other projects. The lessons learned about lightweight performance influenced the development of cars, like the 1978 Dodge Aspen RT and Plymouth Volare Roadrunner. The 340 engine's development pushed Chrysler's small block technology forward, leading to improvements in the 318 and 360 that would benefit millions of trucks and cars. But perhaps the most interesting aspect of the Duster story is what it revealed about automotive product planning. Here was a car that violated every rule of 1960s Detroit product development. It wasn't based on extensive market research. There wasn't time. It didn't have a huge development budget. There wasn't money. It wasn't positioned according to some complex marketing strategy. It was positioned out of desperation. Instead, the Duster succeeded because a small team of engineers and designers, working under impossible constraints, created something honest. They didn't try to make it something it wasn't. They didn't load it with gimmicks or fake scoops or chrome trinkets. They took a basic platform and made it as good as it could be within the budget they had. The result was a car with integrity, and buyers could sense that. The Duster also revealed something about American car buyers that Detroit had forgotten. Not everyone wanted or needed a 450 horsepower tire shredder. Most people wanted something that looked good, was fun to drive, and didn't break the bank. The Duster delivered all three in a way that no other car of its era quite managed. Consider the ownership experience. A Duster was easy to work on. The engine bay was roomy enough that you could actually see and reach components. The Slant 6 was legendary for its durability. Stories of them running without oil or with blown head gaskets were common. The 340 and 360 V8s were equally robust if maintained properly. Parts were cheap and available at any auto parts store. Any mechanic in America knew how to work on them. This accessibility extended to modifications. The Duster became a favorite of hot rodders and racers because it was such a good starting point. Want to go faster? Bolt on some headers, a bigger cam, and a 4-barrel carburetor. Want to handle better? Bigger sway bars, stiffer springs, and better shocks were readily available. Want to go crazy? The engine bay could swallow a 440 or even a 426 Hemi with some modification. The racing success continued throughout the Duster's production run. In addition to dominating pro stock drag racing, Dusters were successful in Trans Am racing, NASCAR's Grand American Division, and even international rallying. Richard Petty drove a Duster to several victories in NASCAR's shorter tracks. The car's combination of lightweight, good handling, and reliable power made it competitive in almost any form of motorsport. But by 1975, the writing was on the wall. The Duster was still selling well, 165,437 units that year, but Chrysler was developing an all-new platform for its compact cars. The F-body Dodge Aspen and Plymouth Volare would debut for 1976, replacing the aging Valiant Dart platform that had served so well for 16 years. The 1976 model year was the Duster's last, and Plymouth gave it a proper send-off. They created the Feather Duster, an economy special that used aluminum components to reduce weight and achieved an impressive 36 mpg highway rating. They also offered the Space Duster, a package that included fold-down rear seats for increased cargo capacity. But everyone knew the end was near. The final Duster rolled off the assembly line in late 1975. In 7 model years, Plymouth had built over 1.3 million Dusters. To put that in perspective, Ford built about 1.2 million Mustangs in the same period, and the Mustang is considered one of the most successful cars in history. Yet how many people today remember the Duster with the same reverence? The Volare that replaced the Duster was a disaster. Despite being all new and supposedly more advanced, it was plagued with quality problems. The front fenders rusted, the hoods flew open at speed, the carburetors stalled, the transmissions failed. Chrysler recalled millions of them. The Volare nearly bankrupted Chrysler and destroyed Plymouth's reputation for building reliable, affordable cars. By comparison, the ancient Duster looked like an engineering masterpiece. This contrast highlights what made the Duster special. It wasn't advanced, it wasn't sophisticated, it wasn't even particularly innovative. It was simply right. The right car at the right time, at the right price. It gave buyers what they actually wanted rather than what product planners thought they should want. The Duster's influence on Chrysler's survival cannot be overstated. The profits from those 1.3 million units kept Plymouth dealers in business through the dark days of the mid-1970s. The engineering lessons learned influenced a generation of Chrysler products. The racing success built brand loyalty that lasted decades. When Chrysler teetered on the edge of bankruptcy in 1979, it was the reputation for building tough, honest cars like the Duster that helped convince the government to provide loan guarantees. Looking back, the Duster's accident-to-success story provides lessons that are still relevant today. First, constraints can breed creativity. The Duster team's tiny budget and impossible timeline forced them to think differently, to find elegant solutions instead of expensive ones. Second, understanding your actual market is more important than creating the market you wish existed. Plymouth wanted to sell expensive muscle cars. Buyers wanted affordable, practical performance. The Duster gave them what they wanted. Third, honesty in engineering matters. The Duster never pretended to be something it wasn't. It was a Valiant-based economy coupe with some performance options, and it wore that identity proudly. Buyers appreciated the lack of pretension. In an era of fake hood scoops and non-functional air intakes, the Duster's straightforward approach was refreshing. Fourth, timing is everything, but you can't always plan for it. The Duster arrived just as the traditional muscle car market was collapsing. If it had come 2 years earlier or 2 years later, it might have been a footnote. Instead, it became a phenomenon. Sometimes success is about being in the right place at the right time with the right product, even if you got there by accident. The collector market has finally started to recognize the Duster's significance. While they'll never reach the values of Hemi Cudas or six-pack Challengers, clean Duster 340s now command respectable prices. A pristine 1970 Duster 340 4-speed can fetch $40,000 or more. Even six-cylinder Dusters are finding appreciation among collectors who recognize their historical importance. But the Duster's real legacy isn't in collector values or production numbers. It's in proving that great cars don't always come from huge budgets and perfect planning. Sometimes they come from desperation, creativity, and a deep understanding of what people actually need. The Duster was never supposed to succeed. It was supposed to be a stopgap, a placeholder, a way to keep the lights on until something better came along. Instead, it became the most successful Plymouth of the 1970s. It outsold every muscle car Plymouth ever built. It saved the dealer network, it funded product development, it won races, it created loyal customers. It did everything the expensive, carefully planned Barracuda was supposed to do, and it did it better. The Plymouth Duster stands as proof that in engineering, as in life, sometimes the best mistakes are the ones that weren't supposed to happen at all. It reminds us that innovation doesn't always mean complexity, that success doesn't always require perfection, and that sometimes the most important products are the ones nobody planned for. Today, as the automotive industry grapples with electrification, autonomy, and changing consumer preferences, the Duster's story feels particularly relevant. It reminds us that understanding fundamental human needs, affordability, practicality, and yes, fun, matters more than chasing the latest trend. It shows that constraints can force innovation in ways that unlimited budgets never could, and it proves that sometimes the best product strategy is to build something honest and let the market decide. The Duster was Plymouth's best mistake because it was never trying to be anything other than what it was, a good, honest, affordable car with a bit of style and available performance. In an industry obsessed with image and pretense, that honesty was revolutionary. The Duster didn't save Plymouth, nothing could do that in the long run, but it gave the brand 7 great years, millions of happy customers, and a legacy that deserves to be remembered. When you see a Duster today, whether it's a restored show car or a rusty survivor in someone's backyard, remember what you're looking at. You're looking at a car that wasn't supposed to exist, built by a team that wasn't given enough time or money on a platform that was already obsolete during the worst possible time for performance cars, and yet it succeeded beyond anyone's wildest dreams. That's the real lesson of the Plymouth Duster. Sometimes the best ideas are the ones you stumble into. Sometimes the biggest successes come from the smallest budgets, and sometimes, just sometimes, a mistake turns out to be exactly what everyone was waiting for. The Duster was all of these things and more. It was the accident that saved Plymouth, the economy, car that became a legend, and the best mistake Detroit ever made. What's your favorite underdog car story? Drop a comment below and let me know about the unlikely success stories that captured your imagination. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of Plymouth's most fascinating chapters, make sure to subscribe because we're just getting started exploring the amazing stories behind the machines that moved America. Until next time, keep those engines running, and remember, sometimes the best engineering comes from having no other choice.